Today's another first at Let's Talk Bitcoin. We're happy to play host to a strategy brief intended for the Bitcoin community at large from Brock Pierce and the other folks at SaveGox.com. We'll join them now.
Well, Adam, thank you for giving us an audience. You've got me, Brock Pierce, here. John Betts, who would be assuming the role of CEO of Mt. Gox, replacing Mark in the event that we can avert a liquidation in favor of a rehabilitation, and also William Quigley, who's part of the syndicate that's led this effort to save Gox over the last 7 weeks. William is a longtime venture capitalist. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Again, I'm Brock. I've been in the digital currency space since the late 90s. I've been following Bitcoin since its inception, and I've been working more or less full-time on building businesses and making investments in the ecosystem, including the underlying currency as well as others, for about 2 years now. And as a result of that, having seen the failure of Gox, from at least my perspective, I saw this as quite a tragedy for the industry. Not so much for us as insiders. We do all recognize, unless, of course, you've lost Pointer or cash there, and I feel for everyone that has. But as insiders within the industry, we understand that Bitcoin will survive. And over the long term, clearly, Gox is not going to alter the long-term course of everything that we're doing here. But in the short term, it certainly had a very negative, it's created in terms of amongst the general public, a lot of very negative responses. I can't even count how many people came up to me following the collapse of Gox that said, Brock, I'm really sorry that Bitcoin failed. And just explaining to people the difference between Mt. Gox and Bitcoin, because most people are just reading headlines. And I think amongst the general public, it certainly had a very negative reaction. And for those that were on the fence thinking about making investments or jumping into the space, I know it's had a very negative reaction. And of course, most of all, for all of those people that have had coin and cash there. So I do believe that the failure of Gox is going to have a negative reaction for a very negative implications for those that have lost money, as well as amongst the general public. And then perhaps most of all, it certainly created a green light for regulators. And I don't think we've seen all of the negative impacts that are going to come from that to kind of jam through just about anything they want. And I think demonstrating that when banks fail, governments often have to step in, that the Bitcoin community is such that it's capable of self-regulation, it's able to self-correct and heal, and not without a bailout from anyone, just by people from the community stepping up and trying to make the most of a bad situation, which is what we're attempting to do here. And I think we'll walk through in greater detail. William, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is William Quigley. So I have been involved in a lot of early stage company financings over the years and have a pretty extensive background in financial services. As it relates to Bitcoin and Mt. Gox, my interest in trying to do something for Mt. Gox came from understanding some of the things Brock spoke about, which was what would happen if Mt. Gox failed, and not just to the people who had coins and now weren't going to get anything, but more broadly, what processes were going to be put in place to administer a company like Gox. That was a particular concern of mine, because I had a concern that because there's so little understanding of what Bitcoins are and what cryptocurrency is, my concern was that we may find that the court system doesn't know how to administer a company in receivership like Mt. Gox. And every concern I had has been realized. Essentially, the Japanese court has decided that Bitcoin really is not something they have jurisdiction over or really appreciate or understand. And they assign very little weight to the creditors who are owed Bitcoin. And this is really troubling, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to educate even the Bitcoin community around. But I want anyone listening to this to really understand that this is a precedent-setting event. Mt. Gox is the first real bankruptcy of a Bitcoin company. Yes, it was bankrupt in Japan. It would have been better I think if it had happened in the U.S., we have a lot more protections. But the concerns we have are all being realized, which is, given the court's very limited understanding or non-understanding of cryptocurrency, their first order of business, it seems, is simply to liquidate the business. And even that part of what they're doing is being done in what I would say is a very amateurish way. Everyone who has any assets in Bitcoin or who runs a Bitcoin company should be very concerned by the fact that the Japanese courts have decided in a matter of weeks that rather than go through a comprehensive analysis of what is the best outcome for creditors and customers, they have jumped right to let's liquidate. And if we start to see this sort of practice happening any time a Bitcoin company or cryptocurrency company gets into trouble, essentially we have no protections. And my view is that any company, including a Bitcoin company, should have its day in court. And setting precedent now is the best way to ensure that going forward, companies that get into trouble and the creditors who extend any sort of credit to these companies, including deposits, are properly administered. And that's one reason why I think we need the Bitcoin community to understand whether or not they have any assets with Mt. Gox, they too are being affected by this, because where goes Mt. Gox and the procedures put in place to administer the company in bankruptcy, that sets a precedent for all the other companies that shall follow. And John, why don't you jump in?
I'd like to introduce myself. I've been building companies for over 20 years, starting with the internet infrastructure companies in the early 90s, and the last 12 years focusing on Wall Street companies like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, where we were building in the early heydays of electronic trading and automated trading, and seeing a lot of the challenges that Bitcoin's been facing in exchanges in the early days of Wall Street trading. And I've been working with Brock and William and our other partners, Matt and Jonathan, for the last 2 months to lead this effort to take over Mt. Gox and to look after the creditors. It's been a very interesting experience, and I must say that I'm very encouraged by the support from the community for our effort. And a lot of people are realizing that if this is not done in private hands, as William has articulated, to lead the effort to rehabilitate Mt. Gox, and this goes through the Japanese courts, is going to be very detrimental, particularly to the customers. And I think that if we can set a precedent here to fix our own and to restore this and to make whole for the customers, not only is it good for the existing ecosystem, but it demonstrates for all those that are watching Bitcoin on the outside, and whether it's the other participants that we need to help increase the value of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem, as well as the regulators that are looking in the air to say that, look, Bitcoin is safe. It's run by responsible people who, will take care of this, will step in if need be for this ecosystem and help. And it's, my investment in Bitcoin is safe. And it's been really good with, since we've launched Save Gox on Thursday, SaveGox.com, we've been getting an incredible response from creditors and also people that aren't creditors that have been giving an outpouring of support that's in there. Over the next week, I can't understate how important it is for us to get our message out there and get our message to the supervisor in the Tokyo District Court that liquidation is not the right way to go, that this is not company property that was stolen. These are customer assets that are in the possession of the company. These customer assets need to be returned to the customers. And the courts really need to look what's in the interest of the creditors and not those who are being protected by this bankruptcy, whose interests are being put ahead of the creditors.
The options as they stand today appear to be one of two things is going to happen. One, the liquidation, as was presented earlier this week, is going to continue on down that path. There's zero possibility those coins are getting distributed back to customers anytime soon. On average, a liquidation bankruptcy in Japan takes 10 years. What will happen is those coins are going to be sold through one of a number of potential options, but those coins are going to be converted into fiat. so that there is a large balance sheet of cash to pay all of the consultants, lawyers, auditors, et cetera, who over the next number of years are going to be trying to figure out what to do here. And on average in Japan, 3% of the funds end up in the hands of creditors. So if we took an average here, customer coins, which I think everyone wants their coins back. I don't think they want them converted into fiat. But again, if we take Japanese averages, people will get their money back in about 10 years, and it will be very little, if anything.
Yeah.
The alternative to that is a rehabilitation plan, which entails getting people back their coin as quickly as humanly possible. If I may add my way, it would be the day after the rehabilitation is concluded, though we do need to understand exactly who is owed what and make sure that those are distributed on a prorated basis as quickly as possible, which means we need to figure out what happened, distribute the coin, get the business back up and operational, and hopefully some of the community will come back and trade on that platform with an entirely new set of infrastructure and systems, none of the old docs as we know it, an entirely different management team, including the CEO, John will be replacing Mark, and proper control systems and governance and segregation of customer funds. But again, in a worst case scenario, assuming we fail at getting the exchange operational, assuming we fail at rehabilitating the exchange itself, customers are still better served in a rehabilitation process where people that understand the business, who understand Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, are in the control position to make sure that those funds are distributed back to customers, specifically the coins, as quickly as possible. So the option is a liquidation, where I think it's a horrific outcome in terms of precedence, green light for regulator, customers getting little, if anything, a long time from now, versus people getting their coin back, at least what's left of it, as quickly as possible, and an attempt to rehabilitate the business where we're committed to getting everyone back 100% of their money and coin over some period of time, which we hope to be successful at through the resurrection of the exchange and people coming back and sharing those revenues into a restitution fund for creditors, potentially down the road in a GOX coin fashion, providing an opportunity to convert liability into equity, assuming that's of interest to people, not an obligation, but it will be an option we hope to present. And again, if we're successful in the same way we're seeing significant financings in this space, we would attempt to finance this business in a way to get capital in faster so we can get it back into the hands of customers that are at a loss here. So I think the options are pretty clear. And I think once people begin to understand option A and option B, it's very, very difficult, whatever your opinion is of GOX, whatever your opinion is of, whatever your opinion, I don't know how anyone can conceivably suggest a liquidation where lawyers essentially get to feed off a carcass for potentially as long, or at least an average of 10 years, while customers are not getting what they need. I've been on phone calls for the last 2 days with various creditors from around the world who had, in some cases, pretty much everything they had tied up in this because they believe in Bitcoin in the same way that I do, and I know many of us do. It's almost religious to some of us. And when you have that much faith and confidence in what we're doing and the long-term potential and implications, some of us have made extraordinary bets on our belief system. And unfortunately, for many of those, it involved banking with the wrong institution, that being Mt. Gox. And as a result of it, some of these people are going to lose everything or almost everything. And it's horrible. And I think that there is an opportunity to do something other than stay the course or the path that we're on.
Yeah, and this is William again. I would say to everybody, whether or not you have coin in GOX or not, but if you are part of the Bitcoin community, the more visibility we can shine on this process, which means, of course, stopping immediately the liquidation, because a liquidation not only means, as Brock has mentioned, very little recovery, but it also means that this process becomes opaque very fast. Because once the administrator, this is the bankruptcy court, begins to assume responsibility for the business, very little communication is going to be presented to all of the creditors and other people who care. Now, some will say, well, there's almost been no communication to date. Well, we agree, and that's one of the reasons we thought management just had to be replaced. But beyond that, very little is going to be understood, because the administrator at that point is really, that the administrator's boss at that point is the Japanese court system. It's not customers. So one of the things we wanted to do immediately, once we obtain control of the business, and that's still the objective, is to begin providing far better communication with the community about what is going on. In Japan, for instance, and of course we all had to get up to speed very quickly on this particular process. As I've said at the beginning, it's inconvenient that this is happening in Japan for various reasons. One, of course, there's a language barrier, but the other is that the few governments who've come out and said either they recognize Bitcoin or they don't, Japan falls in the category of really saying we don't really assume any value is in Bitcoin. On the one hand, you could say that's a very laissez-faire policy, which for some of us that's fine, but it becomes a trouble spot when a bankruptcy court says these Bitcoins essentially are non-existent, or they're of no value. And if a creditor has a liability with the company, but the court says we don't recognize that as a real thing, you run into the problem of not having any standing as a creditor. And one of the things Brock alluded to and John did was saving Mt. Gox and the Save Gox.org plan. .com is simply to ensure that all of us have a way to voice the fact that these creditors are real people. They believe that their assets are real and that they want a process in place for identifying who they are and when they're going to be paid.
William, if I can add in there as well, you know, a lot of the customers have come to us, and creditors and people in the community have asked, what can we do? What do we need to do? And there are a couple of things procedurally, as well as the message that needs to get out there that William and Brock have been alluding to. The first is go to savegox.com. Register with us, subscribe to our newsletter. We'll keep you up to date with our developments that's in there. You know, as we have the voice of the creditors, we've been asked to coordinate a voice of the creditors by the supervisor and to present this, the support for rehabilitation. So please do this, and you know, we'll be in touch with you. And in terms of what else you can do is we'll be releasing this creditor support letter on the SafeGox site that you can submit to the supervisor in support of this plan. The other thing that's incredibly important and been one of our biggest frustrations over the last 2 months is that there has been no forensic accounting still to date as to what has happened, why customers' funds were stolen, and what customers' positions are. And I know that the Mt. Gox launched this site again so customers can look at their positions. It is our firm view that those aren't necessarily accurate, that there have been some irregularities in the accounting database at Mt. Gox. And the only way everyone can be certain about what their positions are so that they're not taken advantage of for a second time during this liquidation process is to demand a full independent auditing and accounting of what happened and what customer positions are, and to ensure that the customer assets are being protected. And the other item there is to make it very clear to the supervisor that these are customer assets, these are not company assets, and the customer assets need to be returned to the customers. And so please come on and register on savegox.com and give us your support.
Yeah, John, let me just close this out since I think we're about out of time. But again, time frame we're operating under, we believe we have less than a week to avert the course. All the employees are going to be let go. Everything is going to end up in a point very soon where there's no ability to avert a liquidation and put us back on a track of a rehabilitation. We need your help now. This can't be done without the support of the community, without the support of the creditors. Come one, come all. We welcome everybody's help. We're open to having conversations with anybody about how to help going forward. We want to create creditor committees to make sure that these things get handled in a way where everybody is represented. This is a community effort, and we are in communication with the supervisor every day. We need your help to channel this information to the courts in a way that we can avert a liquidation in favor of a rehabilitation. The slogan or tagline we're using is rehabilitate, don't liquidate. Rehabilitate, don't liquidate. SaveGox.com. Thank you, Adam.